My name is Mark Pillar. I'm the founder of Backendless. Today we're talking about, or today we will be talking about developing Android applications with our platform. This webinar is recorded, and you'll be able to come back and watch it again, or uh, if you missed a part of it, then you'll definitely be able to watch the whole thing if there's enough interest. Um, so I'm going to have a very quick PowerPoint presentation, but I'll be going back and forth between slides, which basically just set out a general structure for the presentation and the code. But I'm going to try to spend the majority of the time focusing on the code and the APIs. By the way, if there are any issues with either sound or the screen sharing, please let me know using either the chat section of the GoToMeeting control panel or the question section. And I see a few more people just joined in. Welcome. As I go, please feel free to throw questions in there. I'll be taking a look at the questions which come up periodically. But anyway, really quick, my contact information and just the general info about the company. We are on Twitter at Backendless. There's also Facebook page, facebook.com/backendless. So most of the news we try to post out there. But let's go ahead and get started. So if you are not familiar with Backendless, I'm going to spend just a few minutes or moments to talk about the actual platform. It is a development and runtime platform. You can build applications with it. Once you build an application, your apps will be powered by Backendless, and it becomes a runtime platform. In short, it really is a universal backend. So it provides most common functionality for client-server applications, and that functionality resides on the server side. So whether it is data persistence or handling user registrations and logins, user sessions, messaging, being able to distribute publish subscribe messaging between producers and consumers, geolocation, being able to upload files. So all of that functionality is provided by Backendless. All of that functionality is sort of exposed as a set of services. Each service has its own APIs, and the APIs are available in the format for as libraries for various clients. So we have libraries for Android and Java, which basically is just a jar file, iOS, JavaScript, ActionScript, Windows Phone.net, and there is a REST API. So I know we're talking about Android, but if some applications require access to data from elsewhere, so if you do not see a particular environment in the list right here, then the REST API comes in quite handy. So the main idea is that no server-side coding is required. You can build the entire app without worrying about the backend. However, we are working on the functionality that would allow application developers to upload server-side code and tie it in with various application lifecycle events. And that custom code that runs on the server side will be either Java or JavaScript. But we'll talk about it later. Anyway, let's continue and talk about the actual services that make up Backendless. So first and foremost, user service. So user service, from the API perspective, is fairly straightforward. It supports the concept of user registration. So think about registration form on in your applications and user login. However, there are a lot of different use cases that it also covers. And those use cases could be password recovery or requiring a user to confirm their email address whenever they register. You may want to send out an email and make sure that that this is indeed a real person. Being able to lock out a particular account if the user tries to log in multiple times and fails, that someone might want to break into the system, and you might want to prevent that. So all of those scenarios are actually covered by user service. And to put things in perspective, let me show an example that uses the user management API, and then we'll take a look at the actual API and see what the data looks like on the server side. So here I have a bunch of examples, and you can actually see those examples as a part of our Backendless SDK for Android. And the user service, let me just run it first. I do have an emulator running here. So in this particular example, once it starts up, you'll see that I will be able to make a user registration and then log in as that user. So fairly simple, but should get the point across. So from the registration perspective, let's just pick a name and say it's going to be, say, Jeffrey. Password, let's keep it simple. So the various fields that you can see right here on the registration form, it could be pretty much anything. You get to control what the registration properties are for your application with Backendless. And based on that, the registration form could change from one app to another. But I'll show you the details about each of these fields in just a second. So let's register this user. Now at this point, request goes out to the server, a user is created, and then as soon as we get a confirmation that it succeeded, here it is. So now the user is created. So if we go back and try to log in as that user, we should be able to do that. So this particular application that I'm talking to is configured not to require email confirmation. So now see the user is successfully logged in. But let's take a look at what actually happens on the server side. So for this, I'm going to go into my Backendless console, and you can create, and this is basically the server side of your app. If you go to backendless.com/develop, this is the entry point where you can log in or register and log in, and you'll be able to create the server side of your app. So here I have an app that is called Cool App, and everything about this application is going to be right here. One of the most important things when you get started with Backendless is if you go to the Manage section, App Settings, you'll see a bunch of different keys. And the actual application is identified by your app ID, which you can see right here. And then for each of the supported environments that we have, specifically with Android, there is a secret key. So these two values must be embedded into the application itself. And that's how we identify the app that the client is talking to. And another parameter that would be quite important when you configure your client side is the version number, because Backendless supports versioning, and I'll talk about versioning during this webinar as well. So in this case, version is V1. So let me show you. Remember, we registered Jeffrey and created an account for this. So the actual user service can be configured if you go to users. And user properties, you see, these are the user properties which are defined for my app. And this is what makes up your registration form. Okay, you can actually create additional properties here. You can move them between these two lists. But the bottom line is whatever you define here is how users are going to be identified within your application. As far as the actual registered users, if I go to data, there's going to be users table right here. So these are the users. Okay, so here's this Jeffrey guy that we just registered, and basically all the information is right there. Passwords are hashed, so no one will be able to guess them. But whenever user registers, which is what we have right here in our Android app, at this point, any security restrictions or anything that would be specific to that user, either the data that you have in the persistent storage or files that they uploaded, would automatically become, in the scope of that particular session. So from the API perspective, let me show you what that looks like in the user service. So first of all, from the configuration perspective, I remember when I was talking about those secret keys, every single application must include this line, backendless.init app. And in here, you specify your application ID, secret key, and the version number. As soon as you do this and you start using the APIs, we will know who that particular client is and what app they're talking to. So from the login perspective, once again, it is very straightforward. Just a single line of code, backendless.userservice.login, and it requires two parameters, identity and password. And you get to control what the identity is in your application. So going back to console, if I go to users, user properties, notice that email is marked as identity, which means that whenever you log in users, you'll have to provide email as the user ID. But it could be anything, and you get to decide what it is in the context of your particular application. All right, and all the calls are asynchronous, but you can make them synchronous if you want to. However, for Android applications, it is recommended to go with asynchronous. So there is also a callback object that you provide, which is invoked whenever result comes back from the server. So the login is very, very straightforward. As far as the actual registration, it is also fairly basic API. You create an instance of backendless user. You populate the properties, which are the registration properties, and then you just make a single call, backendless user service.register. And based on that, a user is created, or if an error occurs, then this particular callback object will receive that error back. So that's pretty much as far as the user service. There are a lot of different bells and whistles. If you go back to console, you can configure various aspects of the user service using the console right here. So here, notice that enable dynamic user definition is turned on, which means that you don't need to mess around with these properties right here. You can just define them in code in your application. So if you want to come up with user properties that say social security or address or whatever, you can just do it programmatically, and then Backendless will automatically identify what those properties are that make up your registration form. Let's say login. Here you can enable multiple logins, so different users or different people with the same user ID can log in from different computers, and there are some additional properties like session timeouts and so on. As far as email templates, here you can configure the text of the emails that goes out whenever various events occur. So for instance, when user makes registration, you can specify what the text of that email is going to be, and so on. But let's continue because there are a few more services that I wanted to show you. So data service. Data service works with your data. It is your persistence mechanism that is available through Backendless, through the APIs that we provide. And here, the concept is very simple. You work with objects, so you never work with actual records. You don't need to worry about SQL, schemas, and whatnot. All you do is you create an instance of any object that you want to store, and using the API, you just put it out there in the storage. Backendless automatically figures out what the property of that object are and creates corresponding columns, creates tables, and so on. So here, you don't. The greatest benefit is that not only you don't need a database administrator, you don't need to worry about creating schemas, store procedures, and so on. The biggest takeaway here is creating a super scalable persistence mechanism generally is hard. And here, just by the virtue of using the APIs, you can actually you just basically have the peace of mind that this backend will scale, because that's what we provide for you. Let me show you an example that uses the data service. And for this, I'm going to use the ToDo demo. So let me run this guy. So if you guys have any, we just passed through the user service. So if you have any questions about the user service, please use the questions section to type it out. But here I have a demo called Backendless Data Service, and what it is, it's just a to-do service. So here we can create to-do items, save them in the big Backendless application, and just work with these to-do items. So let's say conduct webinar is going to be my to-do item, which is what I'm doing right now. So now I'm basically saving that particular object in my application. If I go back to my console and switch to data, notice that here I have ToDo Entity table. And in this table, there are 3 records. So here I have shopping, workout, and conducted webinar, which is exactly what I have right here, shopping, workout, and a webinar. So let's say I have already completed workout. So I put the check mark right here. An API goes out there to Backendless to update this record. And if I come back here and refresh my data, and you see that workout, as far as done, is already marked as true. So all the updates are automatically synchronized as soon as you call the API. Let me show you what it looks like from the API perspective in Android. So first of all, notice that there is a ToDo Entity class, and instances of this class are mapped directly to this particular table. So here, notice that we have device ID, text, done, object ID columns, and these columns are also shown right here. So, and this table is going to be created automatically. If I delete this table and rerun the example, save my to-do item, it will automatically show up right here. So let's take a look at what happens when we actually get a list of all the records or update a record and so on. All right, so first of all, notice that we have this private static variable called data store. And this variable looks like is basically an object retrieved using the Backendless API. And it looks like backendless.persistence.auth. So as soon as you call this, you basically get a reference to an object responsible for persisting data in your Backendless application. And the data store object has all the functions to work with your data. So for instance, removing an instance or removing a record is going to be datastore.remove. Or saving one in there, it's datastore.save. And if you want to get a list of all the entities, it is datastore.find, which also accepts various queries. But essentially, it's basically a full CRUD of functions that you have on that particular object. And if you were querying the data, then there is also a query object, which may be configured with various where clauses or various queries to retrieve exactly what you want. But that's pretty much it. So the simplicity is fairly obvious, but the power of this API is huge. And not only because you can easily create your persistent data, but also because Backendless supports related data. So let's say if we have a class that references some other class, and you persist it, then Backendless will automatically figure out the relationships and create all the corresponding tables and relate them accordingly on its own without any additional intervention. However, you can go back to the console and switch to schema and permissions, and here customize the schema to your liking. So in fact, that there is no really prescribed way to do it. You can either start with API and then go back and tweak your schema, or you can start with schema and based on that, just start coding against it. It is completely up to you how you would prefer to work with it. All right, so that's data, but going back to the actual data viewer, the data here is editable, so you can just click on any cell, modify it, and save it, and the data is going to be persisted automatically. You can create additional tables, which is the UI right here, adding additional rows and so on. We're working on the functionality where you can import additional data, either schema or data directly from the console. But right now, this functionality is not available yet. All right, let's move on. The next service is here in this slide, audio, video streaming and recording. At this point, for Android, audio, video streaming and recording is available only if you do it with Adobe Air. We do not have a native implementation yet, and we're investigating various ways to do it. The infrastructure is there. It's just we haven't figured out a way to get the actual integration done. But as far as getting it done outside of Java in a sort of non-traditional Android approach, if you were to use Adobe Air, then it's definitely possible. We're going to be doing another webinar specifically on Air capabilities, and we'll be looking into this functionality deeper then. The next one is file service. So file service is fairly simple. Basically, it supports the ability to upload files into your Backendless application. And once the file is uploaded, it gets a URL. You can share it with anyone, or you can share it within your application. Additionally, the file storage associated with your application also has Git front end, so you can use Git to commit and push the files into your repository. And as soon as you do that, the files are automatically available in your application. There is a pretty cool UI right here. If you go to the console, select files, you can see the structure of your file storage right here. So you can create additional folders, You can browse folders, you can upload files in there. Every single file is referenced by URL. Unfortunately, the example that I have right here, it works with a device's camera, and that camera is not configured on my emulator, so I will not be able to run it. But let me show you what it actually takes to use the file service API. It is very, very simple. So for instance, in here, the application takes a snapshot using the camera, then we create a file to get the actual file stream. It is being compressed, and after that, all you do is backendless.files.upload. So as soon as you do this, the file is uploaded into your application. It gets its own URL. You can put that URL, let's say, in the data storage and reference it in the context of your application with whatever. But the idea is very simple. You can upload and download files and share it with anyone. So let's continue. The next one is geolocation. So geolocation is a very powerful service. Let me show you what it looks like in console. So here, whenever you create an application, we automatically populate it with some sample data. And you can actually see this data if you go into the geolocation section in the console. And basically, the fundamental concept here is a geo point, which is just a combination of latitude and longitude coordinates. But in addition to these coordinates, you can attach metadata to your geo points, and that metadata could be anything. It's really just a hash map, like a key value, combination of key value pairs, which could be anything. In this particular case, that metadata consists of city, which is the key, and the value is the name of that city. As I zoom out, the console makes geo queries into Backendless and gets additional points, which are rendered right here. So this way you can basically browse your data. You can add your own geo points into the application just by going into import functionality. Just select the file and upload it, and this way you can have your information. But imagine, let's say, if you're building an application with, let's say, restaurant search. So all your geo points could be like points of interest or restaurants. And each of the metadata could be the type of cuisine that restaurant serves, or rating, or let's say pricing grade, and so on. And the API that we provide gives you an ability to actually browse and search using that metadata. So you can actually reference metadata in searches. So let's say you want to find all the geo points where the restaurant cuisine is French within a certain radius from where you are, then this particular API can handle it. Let me show you an example that demonstrates this particular concept. So this example that is going to run will work with the sample data that we uploaded into this particular application. What I will do is I will just select the radius. Since I'm running in the emulator, my coordinates were not determined, but I can still use it because the data is available globally. So if I select the radius to, let's say, 10,000 kilometers, which is quite a bit, but that's it anyway. If I click search, request goes out to Backendless, and it's going to come back, and it's going to query this database right here with all of these geo points that I have shown here. That is what's going to come back in this application. Right now, we're doing some database work and putting the indexes in place. That's why this query is running a little bit slow. But anyway, you can see that this is what it found, and it just shows all this information. So interpolating it with a map, it will be more on the client side, but you can still do it. From the code perspective, it is also fairly straightforward. So here it is. Let's say point activity. So you can see we create Backendless Geo Query, where we specified how we want to perform those searches and where we are located, what our coordinates are. And running that particular search is going to be, here it is, backendless.geo.getPoints. So you put in the query in there and specify the callback. So as soon as you do this, the request goes out, and anything that matches this particular query, all the geo points will come back, and and that's pretty much it. So two main operations: uploading data into Backendless with all the geopoints, metadata, and categories, and running searches within either radius or just the rectangular area, which could be the viewport of your application. Let's continue. Publish subscribe messaging. So it's a fairly common functionality in either enterprise applications, games, or pretty much anywhere where you want to create some sort of interaction between the users or deliver information quickly to multiple users. The concept is fairly simple. You have the API that you can use to publish data, and the data could be anything. It could be a primitive type, could be complex type, arrays, strings, dates, doesn't matter. And you have another API where you can tune in to subscribe, and you can basically get the data that is published into by the publishers. I'm going to run a quick example, which is a chat example that is trivially to implement using Backendless, because you don't need to worry about any of the server-side functionality. So here's it. As soon as it runs, you'll see it. And also, while it is starting, I'm going to switch my console to messaging, which is the front end for managing all your messages that are going through Backendless. So here it is. I'm going to enter my name, which is Mark. Start chat. And then if I have more than one application joining this chat, then all of the people will be able to chat together. Let's just start with hello. So message goes out. It is published into the channel, and we'll be able to see it right here. So here it is. But also in the console, we can actually see all the messages that are going through this channel. So if I send a message right here from the console, and let's say my publisher ID is going to be sysadmin, and I publish, so this message goes out into this particular channel, which is default. But in my emulator, I can also see this message. So creating a chat is trivially easy, and it is also immediately scalable. So if you have a very large traffic of people chatting and using this particular application, the backend will automatically scale and support it. So creating, even if it's a chat app where you know, with some bells and whistles, like let's say WhatsApp, where you can send out images or notes or voice notes, whatever, you can actually still do it with Backendless. There are some permissions that you can assign. So for instance, if you want to restrict certain users or certain roles, whether they can publish or subscribe, you can easily do it using the console. So the security is just built in to Backendless. From the API perspective, it is also very straightforward. There is one call to do publishing of data, and there is one call to subscribe. So here in the chat activity, this is how we subscribe. So just provide the channel name and the callback. And then as far as the callback, whenever messages come in, this function is going to be executed. And here you basically get a collection of all the messages that were published. So and very similar on the publishing side. So whenever I believe it is going to be right here that I just missed. So here it is, backendless.messaging.publish. So once again, you specify the channel and the actual message object. Very straightforward and opens up a lot of different opportunities. Specifically on messaging, if you're building an application where you don't want to get all the messages published, there is a filtering capability. So you can say, deliver only messages that satisfy such and such criteria. And that criteria could be described via headers or some additional metadata associated with with the messages that you publish. It's all in the docs. You can actually go in and see exactly what I'm talking about, or just ask questions right here. Let's continue. Push notifications. So, support for push notifications is huge because of the actual problem that it solves. If you are delivering push notifications to Android devices or iOS devices or Windows Phone devices, then Backendless makes it trivially simple because you can just use one API to deliver those messages as push notifications to all of the devices. So all of the integrations are already done with Apple, with Google, with Microsoft. And on the client side or server side, you can actually use just one call to deliver those messages. The SDK includes a demo called push demo. And here, since we are in a screen sharing, I would need to run it on a device, and I haven't figured out a way how to show it on the device because on the emulator, push notifications don't work, or at least I haven't figured out how. But if you look into this push demo, it basically describes exactly what needs to be done. But specifically, you basically have to configure the manifest file and grant some permissions. And it's also everything is in the doc, but if you are coding push notifications, make sure to adjust your Android manifest. And then from the API perspective, it's also very straightforward. All you do is you basically call backendless.messaging register device. That's it. So once you registered your device, then any client can send push notifications to this device. And even if the app is not running, a notification will show up and will be delivered to the notification center. So definitely check it out. And that's pretty much it as far as the actual services that I want to show you. There are a lot of different bells and whistles throughout the console and in the API that I have skipped for the reason that just wanted to keep it kind of from the overview perspective. But if you guys have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them now, or if you would like to see something else that I haven't shown, let's open up the Q&A, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. While you're thinking of the questions, something else that I wanted to show you is specifically versioning. So versioning is built in, and the way versioning works with Backendless is, let's say you build one application, let's call it version 1, and you have some data, you have some users, and then you started working on version 2. And in version 2, you may have enhanced some of the objects that you work with, added some additional properties, and so on. So whenever you register version 2, you can actually say that version 2 will share data with version 1, meaning that anything that version 1 has, as far as data and schema and so on, would be applicable to version 2. But in addition to that, version 2 could include some additional data properties. The cool thing about it is that version 2 users, whenever they upgrade and download a new version of your app, they will still be able to see their data, but they will just have more functionality available to them. And at the same time, version 1 users will continue using that application without any problem. Or if you're building a new version and you want to say that this version is completely disconnected and it just starts with from scratch, you can still do it. If you go to manage versioning, then you can create new versions right here. So you see, whenever you register a version, you can say create a brand new version or copy or share data with another version. So this is a very powerful mechanism. And as soon as the version is created, you just reference the version in the API. And I think I have shown that to you in the API. You basically just have version number, which is used in the backendless.net registration call. So versioning is definitely very important. Some of the things which we're working on is analytics, where you can basically get the inside view on everything that is going on with your app. Right now, it is just some graphics and charts, but not very detailed. So that's coming up very soon. As I mentioned, server-side code, where you can run not only where you can shift some of the logic to the server side, either with Java or JavaScript. And we're also working on code generation that will significantly speed up and simplify the process of building applications with Android or any other library. All right. So there is a question whether queries automatically respect authorization. So the answer is yes. If your user has logged in and a session is established, then that particular user account or the roles that that user has, the user belongs to, will have some restrictions. So for example, with data, if you open a table, this is a data table, and switch to schema and permission, so here you can specify for users what each individual user can or cannot do, And the same thing for roles. So for roles, there are two built-in roles, non-authenticated users and authenticated users. And the gray check mark means inherit from the global properties. But you can also customize and add your own roles and specify what each individual role can or cannot do. But to answer your question, whenever a user runs a query, if they are querying against something that they cannot, then there's going to be an error going back. Uh, an improvement which we are working on is we're providing, we would like to provide column level security where you basically have role, let's say admin, that has access to all the columns. And then you want to have, let's say, power user, which may not have access to the same as admin. And for power user, you restrict access to some of the columns, or for guest, it is even more restricted. So column level security is something that is not available today, but we recognize this problem and are working on it. So that's definitely coming at some point in the near future.